Hey guys, Chuck again. Quick intro here because again, this tutorial that I'm posting is a little bit older. It was recorded maybe a year ago before the name change from Anime Studio to Moho. But all of the information is still relevant to Moho, even though I refer to it as Anime Studio. And this is a quick tutorial on just kind of the overall process of rigging an entire character. It's a simple character, but if you're new to Moho, it should give you an idea of how rigging in that program works for character animation. Let me know if you have any questions or any other tutorial requests. Thank you very much. Now, this is obviously a very simple character. I just threw them together in a couple minutes, and let me show you what we're working with here first, and then we'll get into rigging. So right off the bat, I want to show you that the mouth rig is actually the same one that we created in that first video about the simple morphing mouth rig, with a couple of just additional tweaks. And those are pretty simple. All I did was I added a second direction to the teeth action here, so you can hide the teeth. That way we can get this kind of big toothless smile there. And I also added another smart dial for the tongue, so we can just kind of raise it up and lower it down. No big deal. In terms of the character, very, very simple illustration. I do want to say off the bat that I prefer drawing in Anime Studio as opposed to importing something from a program like Illustrator. The reason for that is because if you draw within Anime Studio, you have a lot of control over how many points your character has, right? Whereas if you import something from Illustrator, the importer a lot of times adds a ton of points that you don't really need to define these curves, especially in things like circles and rounded edges and stuff. And the reason that's important is if you need to get into point level animation, it's much easier to drag around 4 points as opposed to 32 points or whatever whatever the Illustrator importer needs to create a circle. So it's just better, I think, it's a good practice to be in to illustrate within Anime Studio. Luckily, I really like the drawing tools in Anime Studio, so to me, that's not a problem. This is going to sound crazy to some people, I'm sure, but I actually prefer drawing in Anime Studio as opposed to Illustrator. But that's just me. It's a personal preference, but if you can, I would draw in here. The other thing I want to show you is the legs here. So I like to do legs, put them in groups, and do them as segmented layers, right? So the shin is one layer, the foot is another layer, and the leg is a final layer, the top of the leg. Now you can certainly do the illustration of a leg on one layer and deform that with bones, right? That's not a problem at all. The reason I think that this is usually a better method is because let's say that you want to rotate this shin so far back that it starts to overlap the top of the leg. If that happens and this is all on one layer, as these portions of the vector art start to overlap, they'll actually cancel each other out, right? So essentially the leg will start to disappear if this is all just one vector object, one closed vector path. Whereas if you have it on separate layers, obviously you don't have that problem. So to me, that's the best reason to illustrate on separate layers. And you might be thinking, well, that's fine, but you have these strokes over the knees and you can tell that it's segmented. But we'll take care of that. That's really easy to fix once we get into rigging. The other thing is on the foot, just so you know, I put the foot on its own layer, but the cuff above it is on the shin layer. That way, when we rotate the foot, the cuff stays in place. So that's the only reason for that. Lastly, I illustrated this character with a slight bend in the knees. And that's because we're going to add an IK chain to the legs to be able to animate the legs easily. And the best way to make sure that that works properly is to pre-bend the legs a little bit so the IK solver knows which direction it should be bending. So we'll get a little more into that a little later, but just so you know, that is why these legs have a little bit of a bend in them and they're not just straight up and down. So having said that, I don't know what this guy is. He's just maybe a stick of gum. I don't know. But I thought he would be a nice simple character to rig up, and we'll see how we can do. Now, I don't know exactly how I'm going to rig him. I'm kind of doing this on the fly, so I may run into some mistakes, and we'll get through them. And hopefully by the end of this video, we'll have a nice, easily animatable rig to work with. Okay, so let's jump into it. If you remember from the first video, when you add bones, it's important to know which bone is selected, because the new bone that you add is going to be the child of that selected bone. In this case, that's exactly what we want. This is the master bone, and we're going to add an abdomen bone or a spine bone and then a head bone. So we go to the add bone tool, and we simply drag a bone out for the abdomen. Maybe we'll go to about there, and then we'll drag one out for the head. And then we're going to zoom in, and we'll just add a couple here for the hair. Okay. Actually, you know what? Maybe we can get away with just one for the hair. So let's do that. Now you hit the B key and deselect, and we're going to go down and we're going to take care of the legs. So we want to select that master bone again. And here, let's hide this timeline. Here we're going to add bones to these legs. So remember I said that it's good to have a slight bend in the knee when you're setting up the knee bone. So we're going to keep that in mind. And we're going to start from right here. We're going to drag that bone out to about the middle of that joint, and then drag this one back to the ankle. And then we'll do 2 bones for the feet. So we'll do 1 for that foot, and then 1 for the toe. And then deselect, and we're just going to do the same thing on the other side here. So we're going to drag one out to about the middle of that joint, down to the ankle. Then we'll do the foot and the toe. Okay? So adding the bones is that simple. We already have the bones in the rig that we need. Okay? So now we just have to bind the artwork to those bones. There's a couple of different ways to bind artwork to bones. If you remember in the first video in this series, I showed you this, this area of influence that these bones have, right? I typically don't use this method. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just the method that I use works fine for me, so I don't need these areas of influence. So what I do is I use this bone strength tool, the shortcut is S, and I select all the bones, and I just make sure I drag, click and drag all the way to the left and get rid of those zones of influence. Okay? Now, before we start actually binding the artwork, let's go ahead and rename these bones so they make sense. So this one I'm going to call abdomen. This one I'll call head. And this one I'll call hair. And then we'll do left leg, left shin, left foot, and left toe. And then we're just going to repeat that naming convention on the right hand side. Right shin, right foot, and right toe. All right, so all the bones are in there and they're all named. So let's start binding this stuff. So the first method that we're going to use is going to be point binding. And we're going to select this abdomen bone, and we're going to go to the body layer, and we're going to bind specific points to this bone. So with this tool, the bind points tool, which is the I key, we're going to drag out a box around the bottom half of this character. So all of that stuff is now going to be bound to that abdomen bone, and all we have to do is hit this bind points button, right? So all of those points are now spoken for. Now we're going to go to the head bone, same thing, I key, and we're going to select all of these bones. and we're going to bind them. Now for the hair, I think I'm going to add in one more point right here. And then we're going to go back to the bone layer and select the hair bone. And back to the body layer, and we're going to bind all of these points to that hair bone. Now let's see how that looks. That's good. I'm happy with that. All right, so that was the bind point tool. Let's see how this guy deforms. So his body is deforming just fine. We're going to fix these deformation issues on the side of his body when he bends. That's not a problem. Now we just need to bind the mouth and the glasses. So for that, I'm going to use layer binding. I have the glasses in this folder. All the artwork is under there. And we're going to bind the whole folder, the whole group, to that head bone. So we're just using this bind layer tool, which doesn't have a keyboard shortcut, but it's got that icon there. And you just click on the bone that you want to bind it to. So now, if we test that head bone, the glasses are moving with it. So that's working good. We're going to do the same thing now with the mouth. We're going to select that mouth group, select the bind layer tool, and we're going to bind it to the abdomen bone. So now, glasses follow that top bone, mouth follows the bottom bone, and that's working just fine. So now, let's go down and we're going to take a look at the legs here. For the legs, I'm going to use layer binding, just like we did with the glasses and mouth. But for the feet, because we want the feet to deform at the toe, we want to be able to bend those toes, we're going to use point binding. So, let's do the left leg first. We'll select that left leg layer, which is the top one, and we're going to layer bind it to that leg bone. Now we're going to select the shin, layer bind it to the shin bone. Now for the foot, we're going to select that first foot bone, and we're going to hit the I key, and we're going to point all of these back points to that first foot bone. Now the same thing with the toe, except we're going to bind the remaining toe points to that toe bone. It's that easy. Now let's go ahead and we're going to do the same thing to the right hand side. We're going to take the right leg and we're going to layer bind it to that leg bone. Right shin, layer bind to the shin bone. And the foot bone, we're going to point bind to those two bones. And I'm going to show you something just real quick that's a nice thing to know, that this is such a simple character that we didn't really need to take advantage of it, but you can, is if you select these bones and you color them in using this drop down here, you can see which points are bound to which bone. So let's take that abdomen bone and we'll make it blue. And we'll take the top bone, the head bone, and we'll make it yellow. So now if we go into the bind points tool, you'll be able to see that the appropriate points that are bound to those bones are highlighted in that color. So that just makes it easy for you in case it gets confusing which points are bound to which bone. Okay? So all of the binding is done now. Let's take a look at where we're at. Let's drag some bones around. So his legs are working just fine. Looks like his feet are working just fine. Okay. You might see a little bit, you see how his knee kind of bubbles out there? We can fix that with an action. That's not a problem, and we will fix that. For the rest of his body here, it all seems to be working just fine. So now we're going to get into actions to take care of some of those weird deformations. So let's start with the head. So if you remember from the first video, in order to bring up the actions menu, you hit Control-K, or you can go to Window Actions. All right? So what we're going to do is we're going to take that first head bone and we're going to copy the name of it, or you can just type it in, and we'll go to New Action, Head. And you know what? Actually, I'm going to back out of this. Before we do that, to me, it's usually helpful to set a limit to how far bones can bend, right? So for this one, let's go ahead and set some angle constraints, and let's try -50 and 50. And we'll see how far that goes. See, I don't think he'll be bending any further than that. I don't think he needs to. So I'm going to set those constraints there. And now we'll hop back into that head action, and we'll go and we'll create the first action to fix those deformations. So we're going to hit the T key, and we're going to rotate that head bone all the way to the right. And there's a couple areas that we need to fix. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take this point here, and we're going to, it kind of caved in there, and we want to make it look like he's not collapsing in on himself. So we're going to crease it a little bit and move it out to where it needs to be. And then this point, let's move it up and let's actually bow out the curve there. Okay, let's see how those points look when he bends. That looks great to me. So that's taken care of. Now what we want to do is take the mouth layer. We're going to use the transform layer tool, the M key, and we're going to rotate that a little bit because his mouth would be following the rest of his body bending there, right? At least you would assume it would. Who knows what this guy is even supposed to be. But so there you go. So the mouth kind of follows his body there. We could probably even rotate it a little bit more. And his nose should be doing the same thing. So let's grab that nose, T key, and we'll rotate it around. That looks good, okay. Now, the other thing is these spots here should be moving with his skin as well. So I'm not going to make this super precise. You can if you want to, but I don't think it needs to be. I don't think you need to spend a lot of time on little details like that, but I think that looks pretty good. Yeah, I'm happy with that. That's good enough for me. So let's go back out to the main line, and we're going to do the same thing, except we're going to do head 2, and we're going to do the action bending the opposite way. Grab that point over here. We'll move it down to fill out the volume, crease it a little bit. We'll crease this one. Move it up so he doesn't lose too much volume. We'll take the mouth with the transform layer tool and we'll rotate it a little bit. We'll do something with this nose here. And then we'll do something with these spots as well. Okay, that's looking good to me. One other thing that I want to point out that I didn't do in the first video is that when you create these actions, you can go to just frame 1 and rotate your bone and create the action there, and that's fine. The reason I go to frame 24 is because I like to have a little leeway in the middle. So when he's bent, let's say halfway at 12 frames, if there's a weird deformation there, I can use that 12th frame to fix it up. So if the bone is only bent halfway, you can still have a little leeway to fix any deformation issues. So it's just kind of a safety net in case I need to fix anything else. That's the only reason I go to 24 frames as opposed to doing it on the first one. All right, so let's head back out to the main line and let's take a look. He's looking pretty good to me. All right, let's go and take a look at these legs. So we can get in there and we can fix the deformation on the knees. But first, let's go ahead and create our patch layers to get rid of these strokes in the middle of his knees. So the way to do that, let's start with the left-hand side. We'll select the left shin layer, and we'll create the new layer and select patch. And And the way this works is you need to set a target. So you essentially need to set tell the program what 2 layers you're masking out here. So it needs to be above the top layer, and then the target is the layer underneath. So you need to select that here. In this case, it's already correct, left leg. So we'll hit OK. And we'll grab that patch layer, and that's just a circle up here, and we'll drag it down, and you see that that stroke immediately disappears. Now, it may look a little rough in your preview viewport here, but when you render it, it'll look perfect. So what I like to do is I usually size the patch layer down a little bit, just so it's not hanging off the edges and doesn't affect, the leg if it's bent back a little bit. I like to make it just big enough that it covers that joint area. So this is probably fine. And then I usually bind it with a layer bind to the appropriate leg or arm bone. Okay. So that patch is set up. Let's go ahead and do the same thing real quick to the right-hand side. Right shin, new layer, patch. Right leg is the correct target. We'll grab the transform layer tool and we'll drag it down, and there goes that stroke. We'll size it to the right size. And now we'll bind it to that leg layer. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now, you'll notice, especially on this leg, that my joint center is off. So when you bend it, that leg really bubbles out. That knee really bubbles out. So we'll fix that real quick. We'll grab the name of this shin, right shin, create a new action, paste that in there, and go to 24 frames. And I doubt the knee will need to bend past that point. So we'll just use that as the upper limit. And then we'll go into right shin. And we'll drag these points around to fix that knee. And this is a good example, actually, of why I do this on 24 frames and leave that extra little bit of leeway. Because you see where the bone is only bent halfway, we still have a little bit of a bubble here. So we'll fix that. And that looks pretty good to me. So I'm happy with that. We'll go back out to the main line and we'll see if we need to do that on this side as well. I think we should. So we'll grab the bone layer, grab the name of that bone. We'll create another action for the left shin. Go to 24 frames, and we'll bend that all the way back. And we'll grab the left shin layer, and we'll adjust these points till it's fixed. Okay, let's see how it looks halfway. Bubbles out a little bit. Okay. I'm good with that. So main line, and I think we're looking pretty good. Let's check out these legs. They're looking good. All right, so now we're going to go into, where are we? What should we do? I think we'll set up the IK for the legs now. So this is really easy. In order to set up the IK goals, you don't want to have any other bones selected because these shouldn't have parents. So what you do is you go into the bottom of that shin bone with nothing selected and just drag out a target bone like that. Deselect that, and then we'll drag another one out on the other side. I usually like to have these colored in. So the one on the left, I usually give like a green color. The one on the right, I usually give red or blue. And that's just to make it easier to see when you're animating. So let's go ahead and rename these real quick. We'll call this right target. And we'll call this one left target. Okay. Now, setting up the actual IK system is very simple. So we'll select this left shin bone, and we'll go to bone constraints and go down to target. Under target, we'll select left target. When we do that, I do this every time. make sure that any new bones that you create, if you don't want the influence zones on there, you drag them down, you shrink them down, otherwise they may affect your artwork in strange ways. So now that we have the IK set up, let's grab that target bone and we'll move it up, and you'll see that that leg is bending nicely. Okay, so let's do the other the other leg, same thing. Grab the shin bone, go to target, and we'll select right target, and that leg is bending well too. So remember at the beginning when I said that it's a good idea to illustrate your character with a slight bend in the knees and draw the bones the same way. That's why these bones are bending the correct direction. If we drew the legs straight up and down, this bone, for instance, might be bending the other way, making the leg look like it's broken, and you don't necessarily want that. So it's best to get in the habit of doing that. Now, for the feet, let's say you're animating this guy, and one of the benefits of IK is that it keeps the feet planted to the ground. And let's say you want to make this guy kind of bounce around like that. Well, the feet are rotating, and you don't necessarily want that. It's an easy fix. It's a simple checkbox. You can select those 2 foot bones, go into Bone Constraints, and check Independent Angle. Now, if you zoom back out, you'll see that you can bend him down, make him dance as much as you want, and his feet won't rotate. Let's take a look at these toe bones real quick. I would like to set up a couple of actions to fix that deformation. So Control K, we're going to take the left toe bone, new action, and we'll go to 24, and let's rotate that bone up. We'll grab the left foot, and we're only concerned with this one point right here. Let's give it a little bit of a crease. That's good. Maybe we could put that one back down on the ground. Okay, great. So let's do the same thing on this side real quick. Right toe, create another action, paste that name, select the right foot layer. We're going to, select the bone layer. We're going to rotate that bone up. Now select the right foot layer. And we're going to fix that deformation. Okay, so the toes look good now. All right, we can close down that action window. I think we're done with that, and we're mostly done with the character. You see, if you straighten out his legs sometimes, this is a problem that you might run into. Sometimes if you go straight with his legs and then put them back down, his legs will start to bend in the other direction, and you don't want that. So one way to fix that is you can set up angle constraints. So let's say -150 is as far back as he needs to go, and we'll put maybe 3 degrees the other way so that he can straighten out that leg. And then we'll do the same thing over here. So we'll say -3 degrees because this is facing the opposite direction. And then 150 is all he needs to bend it back. And we'll lift him up and put him down, and he's looking good now. His legs aren't breaking. So now the moment of truth. Obviously, a lot of times you don't want to be animating your character just kind of squatting like this, kind of dancing around like this. Sometimes you want both of those knee joints to be facing the same direction. There's a lot of different ways to do that. Normally what I try and do is, if this system will work, I grab that thigh bone and I go into the animation timeline and I click on this end flip button. And that should flip the entire chain around. And now you have 2 knees facing the same direction. So you can go ahead and animate this guy walking. The one drawback to this is that it makes rotating this foot bone a little bit finicky. It doesn't seem to behave exactly the way that you would expect. If you drag up and down with a manipulate bones tool, it rotates fine, but it's kind of, the opposite of what you would expect. You drag up and it goes down. But that's, I think, a small price to pay for having the flexibility of having that chain easily flipped with that end flip button. I think that's a relatively new feature, and it's pretty cool. The other thing that you could do is you could do, a second version of the character with both of the legs facing the same way, or you could, even within the same rig, create a switch layer with legs illustrated both ways and rig them both up. So there's a number of ways that you can tackle that. But to me, that end flip button is pretty good. That one drawback is not really a big deal. So you got your little guy here that can dance around. One last thing, actually there's two last kind of little polishes that I would like to experiment with, and I don't know how well these are going to work, but let's just give it a shot. So in the glasses layer, you'll see that the reflections in the lenses are masked off by the lens there, right? The lens shape. And these reflections, I actually copied and pasted a ton of them because I thought it might be cool to have a bone that can control these reflections. So what I'm going to do is, let's do something a little different. Let's select that master bone and let's create another action bone, and we'll do it on this side. So we'll hit the A key and we'll call this reflections. And we'll click that show label button. All right. Now let's set up some angle constraints, and we'll go 0, actually -90 and 0. Okay, so now the bone can only rotate down to -90, and we'll take that zone of influence right off. So let's get into the glasses, and we'll grab these reflections and we'll drag them all the way over here. Now, if we hit Control K on the bone layer and we use this reflections bone, we'll create an action, reflections, and we'll go to 24 frames and we'll rotate that all the way down. And the action that we're going to set up is that is going to animate these reflections all the way to the side. Okay, so hopefully this works out okay. I guess we'll see. So now you should have a little bit of control there, and maybe you don't want to have them rotate so or fly by so quickly. That's up to you. But now you have a little bit of control over the reflections in his glasses. So that's pretty cool. Another thing that I would like to do is we can, first of all, grab these leg bones, and you're not going to need to touch those. You're not going to need to grab those to animate. So we're just going to click this shy bone button, and they disappear. And you can always show them again by going to bone, hide show shy bones, and they'll show back up. But just keeps it nice and clean. Okay? The last thing that I would like to do, and I promise this is the very last thing, is I would like to experiment a little bit with this bone and putting some bone dynamics on it. So let's start by grabbing this master bone, and we're going to get into the animation timeline now. And let's use the manipulate bones button, and we're going to drag him down to the left. And over a half second, we'll raise him up right in the middle. Then at a full second, we'll drag him down there. Looks like I have some keyframes for some reason on one of his mouth layers. Yeah, we don't need those, so I'm going to delete those. Tongue, we don't need those. Mouth shape, we don't need those. Okay, so we have this guy kind of bouncing up and down, and I just copied and pasted all these keyframes. You can use an interpolation like cycle to get him to repeat a motion, but just quicker and easier for me to copy and paste them right now. So actually, it's not exactly what I want. Let's go down to the other side. And now we'll go back up to the middle. Now we'll copy and paste these. I'm going to grab them all. I'm going to Alt-click and just kind of squeeze that motion in so he's going faster. All right, so we have him doing this goofy little motion. Pretty stupid, but let's grab that hair bone and let's add some dynamics to it and see if we can get some nice little secondary animation on this bone. I want to start actually by adding some constraints because I don't want it to go flipping around too far. So let's add a -20 and a 20. And then let's just leave those bone dynamics at default and see what happens. So it's pretty subtle, but you should be able to see that his hair is kind of flopping around on the top of his head there, which is pretty cool. You could always get into, you could add a string of bones for each little tuft here. You could get into, changing the angle constraints and changing the bone dynamics options here to make it a little bit stronger of an effect. But that's pretty cool. So that's about it. I don't think there's anything else that I really want to show you. Let's give this guy a big smile to say goodbye. And I hope that that helped you with kind of a general overview of the rigging process. I'm going to put this project file in the description. If there are other videos that you'd like to see, as tutorials, other topics that you'd like me to cover, please let me know. I'm not sure, like I just kind of came up with this idea earlier today and figured let's run through it. I'm not sure what kinds of things you guys might want to see, so let me know. Hit the subscribe button if you like this. I'll try and keep doing more. So that's that. Thanks. Let me know if you have any questions. Bye, guys.